Thank you to the panel for being here today. In my other life, other committee work, chairing the subcommittee on workforce protections, we look at regulatory issues and the high cost of regulations that go on. So this discussion today focuses very clearly on additional costs resulting from regulation. Mr. Kosar, last year, I believe it was, you authored an article on increasing federal regulations and how Congress should reassert their authority in the regulatory process. I recently introduced a series of regulatory reform measures which focus specifically on harmful labor regulations. When you see the costs last year approaching almost $2 trillion of regulatory cost of business alone, that's it, not including collections and everything that goes on. It's an important thing to consider. One of the measures that I introduced, H.R. 6325, the Workforce Regulatory Review Act, creates an independent regulatory review commission tasked with removing a third of all the regulatory obligations created by Department of Labor alone. So let me ask you, Mr. Kosar, do you have any thoughts on proposals to establish commissions tasked with reviewing and eliminate regulations?
Thank you for the question. I have not reviewed your piece of legislation, regrettably, but I will say as a general proposition, yeah, I favor commissions to take a look at these things. I mean, when you consider the size of the corpus of regulations, no human being could fully appreciate or understand what's in there. And it just seems self-evident that there is some value in having a group dedicated to looking at it and going through and saying, this is anachronistic, or guess what, this regulation didn't actually work out, and we should consider getting rid of it.
Any other ideas beyond a commission like that you might have that could more effectively monitor the output of new regulations and the costs that are inherent in those regulations?
Well, I think two leading proposals, the ones that have certainly gotten a lot of discussion, are some mechanism similar to a REINS Act, wherein you would look at a whole ball of these things, and figure out which ones are problematic or undesirable for whatever reason, and then have a fast-track type authority to run them through. That's a commission version, or the REINS Act, which has the tripwire where a regulation of a certain size with a certain quantity of cost cannot actually take effect until Congress affirmatively acts upon it. So that would be another way to go. And then regulatory budgeting.
Yeah, certainly familiar with that and supportive of it. Your written testimony mentions that the complexities for collection of fees and settlements have increased as government has grown. Could you elaborate further on this point? That line is self-evident, but is one of those things that came out as I had this past week stuck my nose back in the President's FY 2017 budget. It's unbelievably complex. And there's a basic principal-agent relationship between legislative branch and executive branch. As the persons who authorize the taking of money from the public, the legislators want to keep an eye to make sure that the money is being well spent. When that amount grows to $4 trillion or some such number, it's really hard to keep track of all those dollars, especially if you're not doing the appropriating. So your method of simplifying the complexities of collecting fees and settlements specifically is what? Well, review that for us.
The first thing that I find vexing is the separation, the kind of conceptual separation that's been around since at least 1967 between government receipts and then the offsetting receipts and collections. And how is an offsetting collection different from an offsetting receipt? And in fact, Congress has often written into statute exceptions to these rules. So something that should be a receipt is instead a collection or something like that. Maybe in an effort to be too precise, we got too complex. If you have smart people in this town who are looking at the federal budget and having a hard time understanding it, I don't quite know how the rest of the country can understand it. So I know some folks who are working at a Brookings budget group, and one of the ideas that's being frequently brought up is we need to simplify budget concepts. We need to rethink because we're relying on stuff that was ginned up a long time ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.